Okay, so I just we start. I just ask my colleagues if we are ready to go. Yes. So let me welcome everyone on behalf of Bruegel at today's event on the new EU's growth plan for the Western Balkans. My name is Joel Darvas. I'm a senior fellow at Bruegel, and I'm very pleased to chair this discussion with very distinguished panelists. Three of them are here in the room, and one of them are online. So let me briefly introduce our colleagues. So Matteo Bonimi, a senior fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionali, if I pronounce well, from Italy, which is a think tank for quite some time ago. I think it was established in 1965, so it's a long history on following international developments and European integration. Then next to him, Krisala Hatskai, if I pronounce your name correctly, who is an executive director at the Cooperation and Development Institute in Albania, and I think you are there for more than a decade now. Then we have online Branimir Jovanovic, who is an economist and an expert for North Macedonia and Serbia at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. And last but not least, we have Bernard Windisch, who is the head of unit on financing instruments in the EU neighborhood at the Commission. Unfortunately, Mr. Gert-Jan Popman had to cancel, and we are very grateful to Mr. Windisch to step in with a very short notice. So the discussion today is about the Western Balkans, and I think everyone in the room and those who are following online can be very pleased that the Commission came out with such a plan. I mean, we will hear, of course, the views of the experts, what they think about that. But if you look at the history of Western Balkan European integration, I mean, certainly Croatia Croatia joined almost a decade ago, but many other countries in the region are hoping for a European prospect for many, many decades. But I think it's fair to state that the progress has been very, very slow. Also, messages from the EU, how strongly European leaders would like these countries to join, was very often mixed. I think the instruments which were used from the side of the EU were not always very adequate to foster democratic development and a greater integration with the EU. So I think we can all be very pleased that there's a new impetus for enlargement, and hopefully this new instrument would also contribute to that. So in today's discussion, first I ask Mr. Windisch to briefly introduce this new growth plan. What are the Commission? It's still a plan, so it's still a proposal, but let's hope that it will be approved. What are the main features of this new plan, and what are the Commission expectations, how it can influence both economic integration of the Western Balkans and also perhaps integration with the EU? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joel, and thank you very much for organizing these events, also to the colleagues in Bruegel. Perhaps first of all, let me apologize on behalf of Mr. Koopman. He was unfortunately not able to join today, even though it was squarely foreseen in his calendar. So I'm supposed to introduce briefly the instrument. As you pointed out, it is indeed a proposal for the moment, and we are working on ensuring that it becomes a reality. It was made by the Commission on the 8th of November and took the form of a communication and an associated regulation. So, and I think the key point of it is laid out in the communication. It is resting basically on four pillars, and those four pillars are the integration, progressive integration in the single market, the regional integration into a regional common market, the increased tackling of reforms, socioeconomic and fundamental, and finally an increased amount of financial assistance. These four things, of course, are not independent of each other. So it's very important to understand a little bit the links between these different pillars, and I will spend a little bit of time on explaining the logic of each individual one, and then how they hang together. So the first one is the integration into the single market, progressive integration. As you know, the single market is a pretty kind of important and hefty instrument in principle. Becoming member of the single market is more or less becoming a member of the EU. So here the logic is a little bit to see through the eyes of the candidate countries, to see actually how we can already bring forward certain benefits of accession into the current state. And I think this is really the logic underlying the entire part. Now, on the single market, there have been 7 areas specifically identified where this could be possible. So one is, of course, the free movement of goods. The calculations are that if we look at the annual queuing time at the borders, we basically could save roughly 20 years of queuing every year. So I think this is one of the easiest to understand parts. Then there's the free movement of services and workers. So here I think this is based on the mutual recognition of skills, of qualifications, etc. So that actually it is easier for people to circulate. The third one is the access to SEPA. As you know, many of you may know that if you wire money outside of the SEPA area, all of a sudden your fees go through the roof. The logic is a little bit that if we look at remittances currently, the estimates is that we can save roughly 500 million euros in fees. The facilitation of road transport. I think there's a very interesting World Bank study on the economic benefit on making it easier to circulate. So investment in roads is actually still necessary because the network is not what it is supposed to be. And I think the estimate is that over the last the investment into roads over the last decade has actually improved economic situation by about 5%. Then there is energy. So the integration in the energy market is a key priority, of course, also for the Union, because we do need to look at the diversification of our energy sources. But of course, decarbonization is an aim that is extremely important for everyone. So not just this mutual benefits for everybody. We have the digital single market, roaming. Already there is a timeline based on voluntary accords, and there's significant benefits already accruing from that voluntary accord. But of course, making this more formal and going all the way will increase this benefit further. And finally, there is the integration into the industrial supply chain of Europe. And I think that's, of course, a key point, and it's extremely important to see how we can increase the integration of the Western Balkans economy. There's a link, of course, very strongly also with the pillar on energy, because, as you know, there's the CBAM proposal, so the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism coming in, which will actually also, for those of our partners that are able to comply with standards on carbon emissions in the Union, will have tangible benefits in terms of trade with the Union. Now, the second pillar is the regional integration, of the Western Balkans. And as you know, currently, unfortunately, that has not progressed as well as one would have hoped. And I think there is really the logic underlying here that, of course, if you access the single market, you need to be willing to not just trade with the EU partners, but also with the partners in the region. And therefore, there is a link here between the two pillars in the sense that no access to the single market on any of the 7 pillars will be granted before there is a regional integration in the common regional market. Again, the World Bank study that I already referred to earlier estimates a 10% economic benefit for the region of that integration. 2% for individual country if they were to do the necessary liberalization measures on their own. So there's also a significant leverage factor that we hope to gain through that regional integration piece. Now, in order to actually make this work, there are many reforms that are necessary. And of course, the access to the single market will provide already, I think, a significant incentive because the access to the single market also, I think, in past enlargement processes has shown that this is really the key growth driver of post-accession gains. The third piece is basically to increase the reform or relaunch the reform impetus. And this very much closely linked to the fourth pillar. And the fourth pillar is the increased financial assistance. Now, why I make the link between the two is that under the fourth pillar, money will be paid against achievements on what is called the reform agendas. And the reform agendas are really pieces of a plan of reforms. These reforms are necessary to enhance the growth potential, to unlock the growth potential in the region, and to make the other pillars possible, so to basically enforce that. And of course, this includes also fundamentals, so the rule of law, and we all know that there's important work still outstanding, as also outlined, I think, in the enlargement package that was adopted at the same time as the Western Balkans plan. Now, the monetary envelope that is linked to that reform agenda is 6 billion, 2 billion in grants, 4 billion in loans. Again, I have to highlight that this is still a proposal. And of course, also for the money, we depend on the member states and on the European Council. I'm not going to comment here, I think, on that any further, but you have already outlined that there are also within the member states different views on how this should be structured. But I think from a proposal perspective, the logic is really that we would like with the 6 billion the partners to focus on the reform agenda and on the necessary investments that go with it, which means that we are actually kind of paying half of that money to the budget directly in return for achievement of reforms, and half of it through the Western Balkans investment framework, which is basically the well-known investment platform that all the Western Balkans partners already know very well and understand very well how this works. So I think this is nothing new to them. It is very important that this money that we have suggested to put in the fourth pillar comes on top of what we already do under the instrument for pre-accession assistance, so IPA 3. And under IPA 3, we finance infrastructure. We do already a lot of acquis alignment, so where we need to ensure that that countries come together. The Western Balkans facility, the Reform and Growth Facility, is really designed to work on the growth impediments that still exist. That may be, of course, acquis related, but it may also be in different areas where actually the acquis does not have a constraining function. If you look, for example, at the instrument that was used internally to the EU, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, as you know, there was a long list of reforms for each member state linked to that. And of course, all of these member states already are fully aligned with the acquis, so it's not just because you're aligned with the acquis, you actually have all the pieces in place in order to kind of look at the recovery, the economic recovery piece. It's very important to understand that if countries deliver fast on reforms, they have access to money more quickly. So I think there's a real incentive here, and in return also, if countries do not deliver on reforms, there's the possibility to redistribute linked money to other partners. From our perspective, this presents a huge opportunity. It brings basically the amount, if you look at IPA together with the funding for the Western Balkan facility, it brings the amount, the aid intensity as we speak, roughly towards a similar level of what cohesion does on average in the EU. Of course, I have to kind of say this with a caveat, it's on average in the EU. Of course, in the EU, it's also very unequally distributed. So it's more strongly distributed in the areas that are defavorized. But what this shows is that actually we are already moving towards, instead of having a cliff edge that we used to have, where we had a relatively low level of assistance until accession and then a relatively high level of assistance after accession, to something that looks a little bit more smoothly, in line, same logic as with the progressive integration into the single market. I stop here, and of course I'm looking very much forward to the discussion and any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Windisch, for this very comprehensive introduction. As you described the 4 pillars, the European access to single market, the regional single market, the reforms, and the funding. Now, let me have just one quick follow-up question. For the first 2 pillars, you said that there will be no access to the EU single market until the regional single market is established. But it means that all the countries will have to progress together, and if one country is lagging behind, it can hold back all the other countries. And I mean, a country can lag behind for 5 years or 10 years. So what will happen, those who are indeed doing their good job, but are held back by let's say one or other countries?
No, thank you very much for that question. Then I wasn't clear. It's not about the establishment. As I said already, this is basically the logic. There are liberalization reforms necessary in order to integrate regionally. Any country that actually does those necessary steps will have access to the funding, independent of whether the others are doing it as well. And they may have the access to the single market, therefore earlier than those countries that are lagging behind. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for the clarification. Now, I would like to have now 2 rounds of discussions within the panelists, and then after that I would open the floor to both you who are in the room, but also those who are online. You can ask questions. You can already type your question. So please go to slido.com and write hashtag Western Balkans. And I have a laptop, a tablet in front of me, and I will monitor the questions. And of course, those who are in the room, I would like to ask you to raise your hands when we get to the Q&A. But first, I would like to have 2 rounds of discussions within the panelists. In the first round, I would like to more focus on economic issues, discussing what were the factors which were holding back integration of these countries, both within themselves and also with the EU, and whether this new instrument can indeed be a game changer. And in the second round, I would like to go more for the reform side. As also Mr. Windisch mentioned, that's a very important element, including rule of law, and then ask the question from the panelists how they see the potential of this new facility to also foster badly needed reforms in this area. But first, let's focus on the economic issues, and I would like to start with Ms. Hakai. If you could share your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Joel. Can you hear me? It works, right. So first of all, thank you for having me here today. It's my first time at Bruegel, actually, so very nice to be here. I'll provide a bit of context when it comes to my country, the country I come from, Albania. Albania has been working in the last 20 years to align, so to say, through various reforms, its political, its economic and also legal system with EU standards. However, I would say that the main problems that persist relate to overcoming state capture. It's also present, this term, many times in progress reports, but also to identify the best ways to deal with political and economical elite that do not like so much to behave according to the EU accountability style. And I must say that many figures and numbers do show that people have lost a bit of, let's say, patience when it comes to the EU accession process. The rate of immigration from the Southeast Europe 6 has increased by 10% over the past decade. And in the meantime, about a fifth of the entire Western Balkan region's population has already decided to move and to live abroad. According to VIV, we have Mr. Branimir here with us today, in the years 2019-2020, the average monthly gross salary in the EU 15, meaning the Central Eastern European countries, was 4 to 5 times higher than in the countries of the Western Balkans. 20 years after the Thessaloniki Summit, giving the EU promise to the region, we find that the enlargement process for the moment has no established time frame in the sense of a completion date for the countries. It needs financial solidarity, but also it has to be reviewed. And it was also mentioned in different occasions that actually also the new enlargement methodology is not providing some good, let's say, the promised results, basically. Why? Because in the current situation, enlargement is not designed to achieve convergence. That's why we have new instruments coming in the game to support as much as possible narrowing the gap, the convergence gap. But we need also, of course, resources to support and the development needs, which are huge for the region. Now, if this new facility can be a game changer, and accelerate economic integration, we welcomed this new proposed growth plan for the region, and actually we see it as a first step toward not just acknowledging this gap that exists between our region and the EU, but also as the first step towards reforming actually enlargement. So it's a first moment this is to be said in the very first beginning. But this should go hand in hand with also reforming what also President von der Leyen mentioned in her speech, State of the Union, to reform the pre-enlargement policy areas, which are relevant to eventually then accommodate, the new countries in the EU. We also have welcomed a more intensive approach, communication approach, by the European Commission, in this case, engineer, to inform about this plan. This is very welcome, and it's different when we compare it with the economic and investment plan that was issued three years ago. I also have to say that different regional initiatives, such as, for example, the Berlin process, have contributed. And there in this initiative, we have civil society organizations that partner in many policy areas of this initiative that also have supported for the societal actors to take information and to be more informed about what this momentum is like, why it's important to use it, but also to understand better the processes and how they are working and how the different societal actors actually can be involved in the different processes, including this new growth plan. Now, the game changer in this plan is actually the strong conditionality that comes with the plan, if applied as it should, of course. And of course, it's not yet an endorsed and approved plan. It's still a proposal, and details and work is still ongoing when it comes to many components. But we suggest that this conditionality actually to take into account two elements. First, a multi-level approach. It's very needed that it should be set a multi-level approach conditionality and applied at every level of governance, not just the top level and the central level. And secondly, the alignment of the countries' foreign policies, of the countries with a common foreign and security policy of the EU. Now, when it comes to resources, time frame, and delivery mechanism, because it's about the governance also of this plan, and here I think there is lots of expertise in the region when it comes to the different processes that they have been going through, the different policies, the economic and investment plan, etc. In terms of resources, we believe that the current envelope proposed, of course it's still a proposal, with the growth plan is not enough to sustain the Western Balkans development needs and convergence gaps. I'm sure maybe Matteo will touch on this issue later, but I want only to mention that if you assume that the current population of the Western Balkan region is around 16 million of inhabitants, 6 billion euro is about 375% euro per capita, and together with IPA 3, which for the 7-year period of implementation of these instruments, it's about 500 euro per capita. It is 7 times less than what Croatia actually receives. So there is not the real convergence that we would like and we would hope for, but it can narrow, of course, the gap. Time frame is also important when it comes to the implementation of this plan. And I guess it will be with the new Commission that actually the plan will be implemented, because it will take time for the countries to prepare the reform agendas and also for the assessment that will follow, etc. And the delivery mechanisms, both, as rightly Mr. Vindic mentioned, they are not new for the region, actually. They already have been there supporting different policy reforms, but also the economic and investment plans implementation. Maybe I will elaborate later on this, and with some lessons learned coming from Albania, but also from the region. But just an example that comes from the report on the evaluation of the EU support in Albania, covering the period 2014-2022. About 160 million euro of budget support, which is one of the, let's say, delivery mechanism that is proposed with this plan, have successfully, the report says, not me, have successfully contributed to the successful legal and policy institutional reforms in Albania. However, despite the successful sector policy reforms, the observed effects of Albanian policy reforms on the well-being of the population have so far been modest. The growth plan alone cannot be a change maker, actually, but it's all about if we set a good governance, let's say, setup, and if this governance setup will bring in the region the much needed mindset that we need. It's about state building, and it's about good governance at every level, not just the top level. Then it might have the potential to accelerate actually the European integration and enlargement process in general. One last point, and maybe we can continue with the other panelists. We read, of course, the proposal, and we didn't see there enough, at least, space for youth, for inclusiveness, civil society, but different LGUs, local government units, so the local level, that should be actually integrated in the indicators that will be set up, of course, later in a later stage. They should be there. I know that there has not been, it has not been done an impact assessment before because of the urgency of this plan, and no formal consultation took place actually, stakeholder consultation. But civil society in the region holds very critical knowledge when it comes to the different chapters of the acquis. When it comes to policy reforms, they are already engaged in many levels. And they have an invested interest actually to be there and to ensure the efficiency of the EU funding that is spent actually, but also of our loans, because our country will also go through the loans component. It's 6 billion euro package toward grants and for our loans. So we as societal actors are the ones actually that have the skin in the games, and we will pay also for the 4 billion of euros of loans that will go through this growth plan. So to conclude, the monitoring framework is very important when it comes to be set up for this plan, and we hope to be those mechanisms to be inclusive as much as possible. Also to so to say, make sure that in the context that we are living, where the parliament's scrutiny and oversight is poor on the government's action, we might be there to eventually bridge that gap and provide with relevant expertise and make our governments accountable. So again, inclusiveness and good governance at every level. It's let's say our suggestions for this, and first let's say reflections on this plan. But maybe later we can elaborate more.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much for this perspective on, especially on governance and inclusiveness. Maybe in a later round I will ask, I mean, you said that people lost patience with regard to the EU process, and whether this can revitalize somehow the hope that this process can be concluded, but we come back to the second round. So now I would like to now switch to Mr. Jovanovic from Vienna, who is with us virtually. So, Mr. Jovanovic, could you please share your thoughts on the more economic aspects of the proposal?
Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this event, and sorry for not being able to be in Brussels. So I'm in a kind of a comfortable position that I come from the region, I come from North Macedonia, but I live in Vienna now, which basically allows me to criticize both sides, to criticize the Western Balkan governments for not doing enough, and also the EU for, again, not doing enough. And today, because we are in Brussels or in Vienna, I'll be doing the second. So I'll be, in my first remark, I'll be kind of critical towards the proposal, and in my second remark, I will try to be maybe more constructive. Of course, I'll try to be as constructive as possible, even in this first round, but still, I'll be kind of critical. And so I'll go to the all the four parts, individual parts of the new growth plan. So I'll start with the financial part. So there is this saying when people from the Western Balkans, or in general, not just from the Western Balkans, comment on the EU strategy towards the Balkans, that we oftentimes see more of the same. So we have IPA 1, we had IPA 1, then we had IPA 2, then we had IPA 3. It's kind of same stuff. Maybe the amount of money increases a bit, but nothing changes structure, nothing changes fundamentally. I would say that this new plan is kind of a shift, kind of a change, but not in a good direction. I would say that it's not more of the same, it's less of the same. Why? Because the total size of the plan financially is around 6 billion euros, which is 2 billion of grants and 4 billion of loans, which is actually 5 times smaller than the currently existing economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans, which was adopted in 2020 and has been around since 21. So we had this EIP, Economic and Investment Plan, for almost 3 years now, and which was 30 billion euros. I'm repeating, 5 times bigger than the current proposal for the new growth plan. And we know that it didn't achieve anything substantial. So why should we expect that this new growth plan, which is 5 times smaller, will achieve anything? So let me just provide you some more information, data on the plan. So the whole plan is 6 billion euros for 6 countries, which have like 18 million people combined. And only Croatia, a neighboring country, which has 4 million population, will receive 6 million funds from the EU through Next Generation EU, or in grants. So Croatia, which is more than 5 times smaller than Western Balkans, will receive the same amount of money. And if you look at the grants, it will receive 3 times more. So of course, I mean, that again shows that this money is not enough, is just not enough. If you look at the grant part, it's 2 billion euros over a period of 4 countries, which means 500 million euros for the whole region per year, which boils down to 0.3% of GDP, of the combined GDP of the region. 0.3% of the GDP is statistical error. So how can we expect that the plan will bring any substantial change when it's so small? Then I'm going to the second component, which I think is kind of a refreshment. That's the access to the EU single market. So when I first read about this EU single market, I thought, well, that's a very good idea. But when you look in the details, you actually see that there's nothing substantial there either. So yeah, it's good, you know, when I go back to my home country, I won't have to change to Macedonian number. I can, there won't be roaming. That's fine. I will be able to send money back home without paying expensive fees to banks. That's also fine. And also some of the other minor things that were mentioned before. But the main problems that the region faces with access to the EU single market will still be there. If you talk to companies from the Balkans and ask them what's the reason why they don't have access to the EU market, they will tell you it's basically the non-tariff measures, the non-tariff barriers that they face. We economists call them these barriers technical barriers to trade. So yes, we don't have tariffs to export to the EU. There's still some tariffs, sure, for agricultural products, but for most of the things there aren't tariffs. But you still have the customs procedures, which are very complicated. They require a lot of paperwork and bureaucratics, and people don't like to do them. Companies don't like to do them. That stays here. Nothing is being done about that. You also have many other non-technical barriers, non-tariff barriers, like many standards that you have to comply with in order to export, many certificates that you have to get in order to export to the EU, and nothing is being changed regarding this. I'm not saying that you should abandon these certificates and standards that you have. All I'm saying is that companies from the Balkans, from the region, need support, often technical, but often also financial support in order to be able to meet these standards. And we don't see that here. So this is a concrete proposal how what can be done here in the future, maybe even in this proposal, in this plan, to support companies from the region to meet the standards that they need to export to the EU. And this will be a big step towards joining the EU single market. Then the third component, the common regional market, again, it's nothing new. We've had it for some time. The Berlin process, I think next year will celebrate its 10th anniversary. That was the origin of the common regional market idea. We have it already. We have this new local idea of open Balkans since, I don't know, a couple of years ago or something like that. These ideas are okay, but they are certainly not a game changer, and I don't see how this new pillar of this new plan, which is called common regional market, will contribute more than what it is contributing now. And then the last part, the reforms. Yes, it sounds very good on paper. We all need reforms. And I'm saying again, I criticize the Western Balkan governments for not doing enough. I'm not saying not enough reforms, but they're not doing basically any reforms. And of course, I criticize that, and we have to acknowledge that, but I don't see how this plan will contribute to that, basically because this plan is all sticks and no carrots. You cannot expect that you will motivate, you will encourage the local governments, the local politicians to introduce reforms by giving them just 0.3% of their GDP of financial assistance. That's nothing for them. Of course, they won't be interested. And of course, you won't see any reforms. If you want to see reforms, you have to provide much bigger carrot, much bigger reward for doing the reforms. And we don't see it at the moment. We see only sticks. We don't see any carrots. So because of that, we shouldn't expect it. So in principle, if I may conclude or summarize my remarks so far, I would say that the current new growth plan is kind of a lip service to the region. And almost everybody that I spoke from the region about the plan is very much disappointed, and it will not contribute to, let's say, speed up the accession of the region to the EU. But on the other hand, it might slow down. What the EU has to do in order to tell the region that it really cares for it is first to give a promise, clear date, when a target date for the region to join the EU. The date of 2030, which is discussed or proposed by someone, is a good idea. So yes, you should say that we aim to integrate the region by 2030, and then it will send a clear message that it really cares for the region. And then the second thing that they must do is to provide greater financial support for the region. One idea that our institute has been advocating for some time is inclusion of the Western Balkans in the EU budget. It won't come at any cost, virtually no cost for the current existing neighbors, 0.04% on average for the current of GDP for the current existing member states, and it will contribute a lot for the Western Balkan countries. If we don't see these two things anytime soon, unfortunately, I will be very pessimistic about the EU integration of the region.
Thank you very much for these very critical remarks. I think it's always good to have different views and critiques. So I think Mr. Windisch might want to respond, but after we hear from Mr. Bonomi, whether you are similarly critical or somewhat more positive.
I'm not sure I will please you. I think the growth plan is, of course, welcome, but as we have heard, shows some clear limits. But I want to say something maybe different on the reason why I think it's welcome. It's welcome, first of all, because it has, for the first time, it really put focus on the convergence gap and on economic development. There were some shift during the 10 years, but the analysis was never done so clear. I mean, the actual enlargement policy framework does not allow convergence, does not allow development, and this is really clear and is said clearly by the European Commission. I mean, few years ago we were really few saying this. Now is common understanding, and this is positive. Secondly, it's after 3 years we see we learned about the new enlargement methodology, and also European Commission mentioning phasing in, this notion that was really not completely defined within the document. Finally, the engineer took the responsibility to define and try to operationalize it. And in the looking at this document, it means this phasing in means basically two things: getting closer to the single market and getting bigger access to EU budget. These are the two, I think, key component. And it might be banal, it might be not enough, but of course it's not a simple decision, because somehow it breaks two taboo that for the last 20 years really brought the region back. So, because I think one of the most interesting things that is in the growth plan is first the recognition that more money are needed, even if I probably would agree that what is there is not enough. And secondly, I think there is the recognition that we need to modify or at least complement the stabilization and association agreements with the Western Balkans. And I think if I read the document correctly, there are some measures proposed there exactly to go towards deepening the current trade agreements. So exactly in the direction Vladimir was pointing that would be needed on non-tariffarious barrier. I see that the document has some potential because it breaks some taboo that somehow were not allowing, because the legal basis was missing, and this is positive and it's something new about the plan. Having said that, of course, we don't know if the operation succeed, especially because we have EU27 that have to agree on the plan. And of course, even if the operation succeed, the patient is critical. It's really critical, and we don't know what impact. And I think what the plan did wrong, the limits, is really about the incentive structure that they have, as we have heard by two previous speakers, not only because the 22% of increase of economic investment plan is not enough to change and to provide convergence, but I think really because the approach within the economic growth plan somehow tried to replicate the entire conditionality of the EU within the EU enlargement policy. He has simply too much objective, I think, and I think it would have been more useful to have maybe a little bit less things inside the plan, have maybe even more transactional approach to have some kind of concrete objective that is reachable now in 1 year, in 2 years, together, and to make the process move, because the issue is not that the process is not moving fast enough. We have seen an enlargement process that is not moving at all. So now that there is some consensus in Europe to modify a bit the enlargement policy, I think really we should imagine some place where the region can immediately go through, and this is closer to European single market, closer to more access to EU budget, that could help maybe tomorrow to complete this process. And this, I think, but to have this, you need a little bit less ambitious plan. Also, I think one last comment on regional cooperation. Also, this connection with regional cooperation, I think, a risk to generate further confusion. I mean, we had the same approach on regional cooperation since 1997. Then, of course, it evolved. But basically there was this idea that the country of the region should do like French and Germany after the Second World War and construct a market and construct the European Union, and then and the Western Balkans should do the same. I think the background conditions are completely different in the region, and and also the economic structure of the country is completely different, and we cannot expect to have the same. Regional cooperation is tremendously important. I think it brought some very positive results in the past, especially in the year 2000, and there are a lot of studies also proving it. But simply you need to distinguish different objectives that you are pursuing. If you want to pursue economic convergence through regional cooperation and regional integration, you will not. If you want to solve directly difficult political issues that are still in the region through regional cooperation, you will not. To deal with both things, you don't need regional. I mean, regional cooperation could be a component, but you need integration into the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for a couple of critical remarks, but also some positives. I mean, That's also noted. So, so Mr. Windisch, let me give back the floor to you. Maybe if you could start with clarifying the financial aspects. I mean, Mr. Jovanovic said that this new growth plan for the Western Balkan involves 5 times smaller amount than the previous economic and investment plan for the region. So, is this plan additional to everything else which is already planned, or it means that this previous economic and investment plan will come to a conclusion? So whether again this is additional and we increase, let's say, the total funding for the regions over what was done in the past few years or not, and then I mean if you could address the many issues which were raised by the 3 panelists as much as you can, that would be very much appreciated. So please.
Thank you very much. I'll try my best on the long list of questions that I've received. I thank you very much for a very thoughtful analysis. Now, I mean, the question is really, I think the question of whether this is new or not, I don't even feel that I have to answer, because you've actually already said why it is new and what is new. And I think it is very important, and I think this is something that I think we all need to realize, that in order for enlargement to work, the narratives need to shift. And the narratives need shifting beyond how much money we put there. So, of course, always easy to say we should put more money. It's very simple, particularly if one is in a position not having to find it. But the question is it actually the direction that we want to go in? So then we can, of course, say, of course, we should do more, and that's probably true. Now, perhaps a couple of points as a reminder. No, the EU budget in general is 1% of GDP. No? So, I mean, we could say in general that the EU budget is too small. Of course, 0.3 sounds little, but that's actually quite significant compared to what we redistribute through the EU budget inside the Union. So I think you can say this is not enough. Clear, I understand. We all may want to have more, but that's just a general situation. I think the discussion in the European Council in 2020 on the size of the budget was of the order of 1.01 or 1.04 or 1.03 or 1.05. That's very much exactly in the bracket of what the colleague has calculated that this costs in addition to what we already have. No, 0.04% was your estimate of what it would cost to integrate the Western Balkans simply in the EU budget. I can tell you on the basis of political discussion, this is simply not going to happen. You think that is small, but I can tell you that if you discuss this with the counterparts that you would have to discuss this with, this is actually not small. So this is very much important. We may like this or not. I think this is just the reality in which we work. Which brings me to the question of the EIP. I think you're comparing a little bit apples and oranges, and this is also, I recognize, is a little bit our fault as well, because this is also the way that we communicate. The EIP was communicated as 30%, as 30 billion, right? So, but the fact is that this is of course leveraged, right? And I think we were very clear about that. This is leveraged. Now, the 6 billion is not leveraged. That's actually loans and grants. Some of it will go through the Western Balkans investment framework. You of course have to take the same leverage factors that you need to do to get to the 30 billion in the EIP in order to compare it with like for like. Now, we haven't communicated this and we haven't done it yet. You could do it. I'm not going to put a figure today because, I mean, you can look it up what the leverage factor is. But to be honest, it's at least a factor 2, so already we are going from 20% to 40. So that's just kind of for you to think about in terms of the numbers. Then on top of it, as you say, it's additional. We are not stopping the EIP. I mean, the EIP continues, and we are going to. So this is in addition on top. Now, if I tell you that we are going to increase your salary by 20%, I have difficulties to consolidate this with the statement that this is all sticks. So for me, basically, the question is here a little bit. We are moving in a direction where we increase the financing amount available. What we are doing is we are making it conditional, and I think that is the direction that we would like to go in. and I also have heard the positive voices. Of course, afterwards we need to see that we can implement it and how we can implement it, and that's not easy. And I acknowledge that, and it's been something that we've already been trying to do also, I think, under IPA 3. So already, I think, under IPA 3, you can see a move of trying to link our financing to our achievements and the performance of the money. We can argue about the question whether that was successful, but I think this pushes that same logic to the next step, and I think it's very important to, again, coming back to the question that this for us, I mean, it's a step change, it's a change in narrative, and it's actually a change in approach that is very important, that's very important for us, and we hope will help also actually in bringing the Western Balkans region closer to the EU, and of course, hopefully also address exactly the question that you've raised, namely that there is a certain fatigue triggered by a process that actually has not resulted in any kind of format. So I think this is really the logic of the package. Now, I also think that it's very important to understand that the measures on the single market replicate basically the DCFTA approach, so they go significantly further than what we have right now. They may look small, but I think again, this is really, I mean, these they may look symbolic, but the fact is that symbols are important, narratives are important, and I think this is also something. Therefore, I take your point, and I'm very grateful for it. We've worked a lot on communication in DG NEAR, in the Commission more widely. So the fact that this is recognized is, I will report this back, is music to the ears. And of course, we need to be better, and we need to continue this approach. But of course, we are also trying to show this. Coming to perhaps the last point, that there are too many objectives. This is, of course, if I may give a small insight into the internal workings. The Commission is a collegial construct, and of course you know that there are specialists in all kinds of policy fields, so it is very difficult to focus. We've really tried in this approach, and I think this is also something that we will want to kind of show in the reform agendas once they are adopted, that we focus actually on the specific areas in the reforms where they actually have an impact. So you may not see it that much in the overall construct because, of course, you still have everything somehow included as a possibility. But I think the will is really there, and the recognition is also there that this is not enough money to do everything. And it also doesn't need to do everything because, of course, the enlargement process is going to go on. The discussion on everything is going to continue. So the logic here is to focus on those key areas where perhaps we can be complementary to what is necessary under enlargement and what needs to be done in a key alignment, so that we can actually kind of have an impact. But I think that cannot be so clearly broken down in the regulatory text, just because it may also be different between different Western Balkan partner economies, and therefore it needs to be structured through the reform agenda, and then we come back to, let's see how the implementation is going to work. But the aim is clearly to actually narrow down and focus. Which brings me to the last point, transactional. In the reform agenda, the logic is really that we have 7 payment dates between 24 and 27. And like for the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the logic is to kind of stagger and sequence the reform and investment steps over those dates, which is exactly then, in a sense, what you asked for. It's just that perhaps it's not so clearly spelled out in the text, and I hope that goes in the direction that you suggested. I know probably have not replied to everything, but I'll stop here and then we can go through another round. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, let me raise one point from each of the 3 interventions, and which you have not yet covered. So, Mr. Hakai mentioned the importance of involving civil society. So, do you foresee any role for such institutions in the process as a whole? Then Mr. Jovanovic very much emphasized the role of non-tariff barriers in access to the single market. So will this DFCA type of domestic reforms address that, or that will continue to remain? And Mr. Bonomi argued that regional integration might not be that necessary, while you said that creating conditions for that is a precondition for greater access to the single market. So So indeed, how important is that? So if you could address these three questions, and then since time is running, I would then open the floor for questions. There are already many online, but I'm also sure that people in the room would like to ask.
Thank you. So on CSO, I'll try and be as brief as I can. So on CSOs, there will be a focus on that inside the countries when the reform agenda is put forward, that there is a consultation process, which I can, of course, not promise that it goes through all the different layers of governance, which in the Western Balkans can be very challenging. So from that perspective, I think this will be covered. I think, again, we come back down to the question of how it's going to be implemented. And so it will come down to the question of implementation more than on paper that this is covered. The second question on non-tariff barriers. So basically we've been talking about customs and standards. So again, under DCFTA approach, the logic is really not so much that we are getting rid of all customs procedures. And of course, I mean, we are not going to get rid of our standards. I mean, in line with EU key alignment, by definition, all the enterprises that want to actually trade with the Union have to comply with those standards. So I think this is not something that will change. However, the point is that companies do have access to technical assistance on these points. That again depends a little bit on what is in place currently under the Western Balkans, already under IPA actually, because there are schemes under the Western Balkans investment framework that already are running and that give exactly support to small and medium enterprises in particular, which of course is the key audience for such questions, to address these questions. So again, we are not right now, at least, in a position to actually force anyone to do this in their specific country, but of course this is also strongly encouraged. Then on the regional integration, I think your point is strongly taken. It's just that from our perspective, these two things go together. i.e., when you access the single market, ultimately, by definition, you need to treat all the countries that are part of the single market in exactly the same way. Now, the question is, chicken and egg one, no? Do you first bring them into the single market and then through that force people to accept it? Or do you actually want to have a show of goodwill to actually show that? And I think here the logic is really, we would like to see a commitment to integration. And that's also coming back to the question that you raised, no? It's not that the regional market needs to be in existence, but what is the point is really we want to have a show of goodwill to advance on the necessary steps, which then kind of allows individual access to the single market.
Thank you. So Ms. Haka indicated that she would like to give a quick response also. If the other two panelists would like, please come in. Ms. Haka, please.
Yes, no, just commenting on the consultation element. We have consultation processes in Albania. But when it comes to IPA, it's only when everything is already decided. And it's over. You can't change much there. I only receive the annual implementation report of IPA. It's too late. Everything has been decided. Everything has been implemented. It's the very late stage. Currently, the growth plan proposal puts at the very end, in the ex post evaluation moment, the civil society component. Again, it's at the very end. We need to be in the very beginning, actually. Also, kind of, as I mentioned in my previous intervention, somehow mitigate the poor scrutiny and poor oversight that we have in our country. And this is also the progress report that states that consultation processes are weak, are on the paper, they are not actually having a sustainable, so to say, let's say, impact on the processes. This is the first thing. And we have an experience here when it comes to the economic and investment plan, because we have been monitoring actually 12 flagship projects of the economic and investment plan. The table here, it's 5 in transport, and the economic and investment plan is ongoing. It's not something that it's finished. We have 5 in energy, 1 in social, and 1 in environment. It's around 1.2 billion euro, which we are monitoring on regional scale. And our main takeaway is that actually there is there is space also there for citizen engagement. And as it is right now, as it is working right now under the Western Balkan investment framework, Well, citizens are eventually, or civil society, let's say, representatives or organizations are involved only during environmental and social impact assessment, which is one of the many phases that the cycle of those projects is actually following. And I have here the table with all the cycles of all the actors that are involved, and here societal actors are not involved. So again, it's on the governments. And we start from identification of the projects, why, for example, projects on transport or energy, and why not in social. The growth plan also has this, and I notice it's very strange because it has this only ceiling when it comes to climate objectives. 37% of it's required to be invested in actions, projects, policies that are related to climate objectives. Now here, why not social? Why not putting, for example, ceilings on social education and healthcare and employment policies, which are very relevant for our societies? Albania, for example, and again, green policy, it's very costly policy. Albania, it's having 99% of hydropowers, basically. So again, here, there is a discussion in the very beginning to take place and not at the very end, which might not be eventually helpful for you know, for a well-governed, so to say, plan and for impact in the long run.
Thank you very much. Any quick remark? If not, then let me open the floor. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. You will get the microphone. Briefly introduce yourself and try to make your comment and question briefly.
Yes, hello. My name is Uffe Hvidkjær. I'm from Denmark, and Citizen Think Tank Europe Dialogue. Just a reflection for the panel about, you could say, international competition of attention. And here I'm thinking about Western Balkans and the Eastern Partnership and the situation in Middle East. So yesterday I was in an event in European Parliament about European integration of Ukraine. So do you see, could it be a win-win with Ukraine and Western Balkan and Hamas to deal with everything at once? And then just a short remark about Albania, that College of Europe are in Belgium and Poland, and they've just opened an office in Tirana, and could this be a good step in the right direction? Thank you.
Thank you. I suggest we collect a couple of questions and then we'll give the floor to all the panelists to respond. Anyone else in the room? If not, then let me ask some of the questions online so you can also see here. So the first one is how far the Commission is thinking about what exactly the conditions are for opening parts of the single market pre-accession. Then the next one, given the socio-economic and political characteristics of countries in Southeastern Europe, can any lessons be learned from EU experiences with former enlargement? And maybe also the third one, what financial instruments will you use exactly for disbursement of the money? So it will be a direct budget support or macro financial packages, guarantees, blending, or whatever. So now maybe I suggest we go in the so anyone just in the room, let me ask if any question arises in the meantime. If not, then I suggest we go in the opposite way this time. So Mr. Bonomi, if you could either respond to the question from Denmark or any of the online questions, please.
Of course, there is a competition for attention now, but it's not necessarily a competition. I mean, of course, the enlargement process was not going a few years ago, and it brought at least some new momentum. The big issue is here how long the momentum could last and which kind of enlargement policy will come out of these 2 dramatic years. And how it could be maybe a more sustainable and effective enlargement policy. I mean, and I think if we look at the region now, we have at the region we have a huge problem of leadership, for reforms, And if you look at the EU Western Balkans history of the last few years, it's a history of lost opportunities. Once one country or one partner could be ready, the others are not. And now we have this strong signaling toward the region that is good. Maybe in a couple of years the region would react. Maybe we have also some changes. I mean, there are elections now in Serbia. Probably the government will win, but maybe the opposition could take Belgrade, and you could imagine that in a couple of years, also in some countries, that there is some different leadership there. But then will be the European Union ready at the time? I mean, we have 27 member states that regularly vote. We have European election and so on. So now I think I agree with the document is the moment for bold decision, but this bold decision should aim to achieve what is achievable and what will bring the region closer to the EU. They cannot offer now membership to the region. So we should be extremely pragmatic in offer something that could, in a couple of years, will bring the region closer. And I think the only way to be pragmatic is not simply to be transactional, but to be maybe a little bit or less holistic and more compartmental in our approach with the region, because there are some files where you could achieve faster progress. Some other are extremely complicated, and maybe also conditionality. I mean, of course, but there are many things that could be done. I mean, they do not necessarily need to be framed as condition. I mean, this conditionality that goes all through all the document. I understand it's done also for internal reason to explain that to the stakeholder here in Brussels they are tough and they are not losing the money of the taxpayer, and we know that. The fact that maybe you can find some common area of common interest and mutual interest where you don't have to teach and to the region what they should or not should do, but really work more as a partner, and especially and of course you need conditionality there, but more on technical issue, so that they do not that there is a level place field in the market, that they do this not disrupt competition and so on. But it's different that have the entire package of EU conditionality attached with the EU enlargement process that should go on, but still maybe something we can be a little bit more strategic. So it's not that we cannot, I mean, just not go directly there, but imagine something that is more directly achievable and maybe can be also more strategic for the future.
Very quick follow-up question. So you said that it should focus on what is achievable and strategic. So what would be your suggestion? What should be the top priority of this new plan? What you think could be achievable in a foreseeable future?
Two things: modify the stabilization association agreement to go towards some kind of reduction of no tariff barriers. And of course, it can be done only if some standard applied by the Western Balkans in that, but in a very technical way, and increase the access to the budget. I know that there are rule of problem in the country of the region, but usually EU money that arrive there are extremely well controlled. They do not need EU money for corruption. They would just get trouble. And the money from international tycoon that wants to build the new hotels, they will reach the region in any case. What can invest the European Union is much more controlled and invest in things that nobody else would invest, like roads, like public goods, like maybe find some way to make it possible to have a green transition also in the Western Balkans, because now they are basically lacking of the international finance to invest public investment to sustain that.
Yeah, many thanks, Mr. Jovanovic, please.
Answer all of them. I want to briefly comment on the question, on the second question on Slido. about the lessons that can be learned from the current member states from Eastern Europe for the Western Balkans. We did a study on this last year or 2 years ago, together with the Bertelsmann Foundation, where we basically answered exactly that question. And the main finding of that study is what worked best for the Central European countries is EU money, EU funds, of course, combined with the conditionality and the structural reforms, but without giving more money to the countries, you cannot expect anything. So basically, we kind of did some calculations, back on the envelope calculations. What would it mean for the Western Balkan countries if they were receiving the same amount of money as the current member states from EU budget? That means that the money they will receive from the EU budget will triple, basically. In NIPA, they receive around 1% of GDP. The current member states receive around 3% of GDP on average from the cohesion and other funds. And that would increase their GDP per capita around 15 percentage points. So if it's on average, let's say 40% of European average now, it will increase to 55% of European average, which is substantially increased. So yeah, this is the thing that matters most. I also want to briefly comment on the question from the colleague from Denmark about the competition for attention. I mean, I'm not sure that I see it in the Balkans. What I see is that the people in the Balkans right now fear that the EU has forgotten them. They fear that all the attention is on Ukraine right now, and they were forgotten. Even though they had similar war to the war in Ukraine right now, like 30 years ago, and despite all of this stuff, the impression is that they were forgotten, and that's why I am afraid that the EU support will continue declining further in the next period, in the coming period, unless they see a change in the behavior from the EU, which they don't see right now. And here I am coming to the narrative story of Mr. Vindish. I agree that the narratives are the most important here. And that's exactly the problem that I have with the current proposal, that the narratives has not changed. The narratives are the same as previously. What we need, at least the most important thing that we need right now, is promise that we want to integrate the Balkans in the EU by a fixed time. So why is it so problematic to say we target 2030 as a date for you entering the EU? Of course, it might be postponed, but let's have a target at least. But why is it so problematic to say it explicitly? And unless we see this, I'm afraid that the Balkans will continue having this impression that the EU doesn't care about them. And I'm afraid that the gap between the two will get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, many thanks. In the meantime, just a few minutes ago, a specific question was addressed to you. It says that, what are your views on the impact of widespread corruption, democratic regression, limited absorption capacities in Western Balkans when asking for more funds?
I mean, of course, these are problems, and these are the structural reforms that we are talking about all the time. And of course, they have to be tackled. But I mean, you cannot tackle these problems if you continue with the same strategy as before. So that's the thing that I'm saying. You have to change the strategy from EU side if you want to change things. You cannot, continue doing the same measures, doing the same things, and expect that you will have a different outcome. It doesn't work. We already see that the current strategy is not working. So why should we expect that all of a sudden now it will start working? So there's a problem. And about the corruption and things and all these governance issues, yes, they are big, but let me remind you that Bulgaria and Romania had perhaps even bigger issues with these issues, with governance, and didn't prevent them from entering the EU. The EU didn't have problems accepting them in the EU. And yes, Bulgaria, you might argue, is still very problematic in these regards, but Romania is much better now. So the experience with those countries can be repeated for the Western Balkans as well, if you really want to change things. On the absorption capacities, I mean, yes, that's the thing that I want to speak in my second remark. So yeah, I was calculating the absorption rates in the Balkans and in the current member states 20 years ago, and IPA 2, for example, the absorption of IPA 2 in the Balkans was around 52% on average for all the countries. But if you compare that to the FARE and ISPA and these other funds which are available for Visegrad and Baltic countries before, when they were acceding the EU, their absorption capacity was not much better. It was around 60% or something like that on average. So slightly better, but not substantially better. And the conditions there were much easier. The conditions now for IPA are much stricter than they were for the current member states. So in the absorption capacity, yes, it's an issue, but it's not such a big issue as people often think. And if you want one concrete example, a suggestion they have in order to improve absorption capacity is to make the conditions less strict. You cannot, expect that absorption capacity will be high if you have such strict conditions, bureaucratic first and foremost conditions for getting the money. You must make this easier. You must reduce the bureaucratics in the whole process, not increase them. And of course, I'm afraid that we are seeing further increase in bureaucratics.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hakai, please.
It was actually it's one of the things that I missed completely from the growth plan. Actually, it was mentioned in the very beginning, cohesion word. If you see the Western Balkan 6, it's actually, you can consider it as a very undeveloped region. And for that kind of situation, the EU has an instrument, has a policy called cohesion policy to support them. And also there you have, with underdeveloped region within the EU, you have issues of absorption capacity, etc. So if you condition absorption capacity to resolving the issues with rule of law, etc., then we are going nowhere, actually, because those are, let's say, problems that also the EU has internally. I mean, this is obvious. We have been arguing since a long time about early access to cohesion funding, exactly because it brings in the missing element from the enlargement policy, which is solidarity. We need, yes, conditionality, strong or less strong, etc. Fine, let's discuss. And let's discuss also the indicators, how that conditionality has been actually implemented, because indicators also tell a lot. And when you see that maybe also this is one of the issues that we can suggest to, for the Commission, is actually to build tailored indicators for this plan, not relying on the existing ones, being it in IPA 3, which are very general. There you also have doing business, for example, from the World Bank, which is discontinued, actually. So you have the Western Balkan Investment Framework, the international financing institutions indicators as well, or even the countries' indicators that they are using in their policy reforms. Building new indicators that address the development needs and targets, it's actually the crucial thing that it should be dealt with. But to come back to cohesion, we think that can complement this conditionality, which is high, of course, and it's actually it's a thing that is missing. And one thing that was also not mentioned before when we were discussing about access to single market, actually it's a accompanying measure about our markets being opened, and the countries, how should they be supported for their markets opening? For that, you have also cohesion funding for member states that have been going through that process. So it was also mentioned in the growth plan, for example, that it is also one of the aims to address the legal and administrative obstacles to cross-border cooperation with Interreg cooperation programs, which is an instrument of cohesion policy where the Western Balkans is actually eligible, but we don't see how it is not mentioned at all in the reform, at least in the content, on the provisions of the content of the reform agenda. So how should the countries, address this alignment, so to say, all this boosting of the cross-border cooperation? But again, here, importance of discussing more and more about solidarity to address all these issues that were mentioned before, which are again, about the narratives being underdeveloped region. So it's again, same narrative as it is in the south of Italy, as it is in Greece, as it is in other member states, but they have been going through cohesion funding. So is Bulgaria or Romania, which are two countries that have had issues with rule of law, etc. But again, they were they were becoming member states, and then of course they did all the reforms that were necessary to increase also absorption capacity. Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting comments. And last but not least, Mr. Windisch, we are over time, but if you could try in 2 minutes to respond to all the questions.
Okay, then I have to choose, no? I think the point of cohesion policy access is the same point as the EU budget access. The fact is that cohesion policy is probably one of the most problematic or controversially discussed files in the whole budget. I do see limited appetite from anyone to actually make access to cohesion policy for anyone outside of the EU. But that does not mean that you cannot achieve similar things as you do achieve with cohesion policy by increasing the intensity of aid through other instruments. And that's the whole point. So I think it's really, I don't think we need to, of course, again, we come back to narratives and symbols, and that may indeed be a different one if you can, but we need to be pragmatic, and I fully agree, therefore, also with what has been said. We need to find what we can do, and I think what we can do, or what we propose to do, is to increase the amount of financing available. That's precisely the direction that we want to get into. I take the point that on narrative, perhaps we need to find a better balance between conditionality on the one hand, but also kind of mutual common interest, which is of course very, that's of course underlying the logic also in a number of areas, particularly integration in value chains, energy, CBAM. There's a lot of mutual interest, so I think this is very, very well taken. But the fact is that, as I think is uncontroversial, there is a certain amount of conditionality on the one hand linked to financing. So for me, that's actually that's a very important point. And I think that also kind of brings me then to the second one. We can argue a long time, but to be honest, the answer why it is so difficult to put a date on accession, you just need to read any statement of our politicians and political leaders why this is difficult. So I think the fact is, again, to be pragmatic, we need to kind of change the approach. And I think that's precisely what we're doing. And the fact that we're sitting here today, in my opinion, is actually a big, big signal. And it may not be taken like that, but I mean, I've been in the Commission for 10 years. Until 2 years ago, nobody was talking about enlargement policy. Literally nobody. So I don't know what the perception was outside of the EU, because I don't know the Western Balkans countries very well. But I think huge amounts have changed. The president has traveled the region, has kind of made statements, promises. So people may simply think this is more of the same, but funnily enough, there was no same before because the president wasn't there. I mean, so I think the fact is really that there is a difference here, at least in the way that that communication works, that is really, I think, important, and we can see how to kind of do this differently. But I may stop here then on that basis. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we can indeed close with this positive remark, which I think is indeed uncontroversial, that a few years ago nobody talked about EU accession as a realistic prospect, and now there are lots of statements, measures, both towards Western Balkan, Ukraine, and so on. So with this positive note, also recognizing the many issues which our panelists raised, let me thank for all of you for participating in the discussion, and for all the audience both in the room and online for participating in our event. Please look at our website. We have many other exciting events forthcoming, and you are also welcome to participate. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.